Good evening, my friends, and welcome to a brand new episode of Terror Radio Podcast. If this is your first time joining me, then welcome. This is a podcast dedicated in bringing you the best of horror and thriller, old-time radio broadcasts, as well as original stories. I'm your host, Keith, aka the Radio Show Nerd, and tonight's episode is entitled Hair-Raising Tales, because as you know, I enjoy a good storyteller. So, without further ado, this is Terror Radio. The two radio series highlighted tonight are Haunting Tales and Suspense. Our first radio play is called The Babysitter, and it was first broadcasted on Haunting Tales on July 31st, 1982. Following that is The Haunted The Haunted Bathroom, which was first broadcasted on Haunting Tales August 4th, 1982. Now, Haunting Tales was a radio program from the BBC, and I wasn't able to find out too much information about this. Following that is an adaptation of M.R. James' short story, Rats. I have no information on this. Wasn't able to find anything. I don't know what radio program it came from. I have no idea when it was recorded, but I absolutely love it. We conclude with an adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's Pit and the Pendulum on Suspense, starring the great Vincent Price. And this was first broadcasted on November 10th, 1957. So, you all know the drill. Sit back, turn down the lights, and listen to Haunting Tales, followed by Suspense.
The Babysitter by Alison Prince.
Nigel's mother came into his bedroom to kiss him good night. "You will be good, won't you?" she said. "Mr. Pope is a dear old man. It was so sweet of him to offer to babysit." "Well, I don't like him much. Why couldn't Auntie Betty come?" asked Nigel, frowning. "I told you," said his mother patiently. "Auntie Betty's ill, and Mr. Pope has offered to babysit ever so many times." She bent and kissed Nigel. "Be good." "Well, tell him I want a story," Nigel shouted after her. Doors banged, and Nigel heard the car start and drive away. Suddenly, he felt very lonely. The sitting-room door opened. Mr. Pope came out and started to climb the stairs, his footsteps as slow and measured as they were when he plodded down the garden path. Mr. Pope opened the bedroom door. "Your mother tells me you want a story," he announced. Nigel sniffed. "Yes, please," he said. Mr. Pope smiled slowly. "Well, I'm glad about that," he said, "because I've been thinking for a long time about a story I'd like to tell you." He brought a chair to Nigel's bedside and sat down. Nigel stared up at him, fascinated and slightly afraid. Mr. Pope's face never quite seemed to go with the big, rough hands. It was a hollow face, Nigel thought. But the strangest thing about him was his eyes. Mr. Pope's eyes were very pale blue, and he never seemed to blink. He gazed ahead of him with an unwavering, pink-rimmed stare, which never quite fixed on the thing he was looking at. Tonight, Mr. Pope's eyes were as unblinking as ever, and as Nigel stared up at him, he could see the tiny network of veins which threaded the whites of the eyes, surrounding the sky-blue circles of the irises with wriggly red lines. "Now, this is a true story, boy, every word of it. Afterwards, you must never think to yourself that I made it up. This is the first time I've ever told this story, and I shall never tell it again, not to a living soul. This is your story, boy, just for you." "Oh, thank you," said Nigel. "Yes," Mr. Pope went on. "I've waited for years for this, to find the right person." "And it's me?" asked Nigel, pleased. "It's you," agreed Mr. Pope. "What's it called?" asked Nigel. Mr. Pope thought. I never gave it a name, he said, but I suppose I'd call it Hacky Basham's glass eye. Hacky Basham, he said, got his name because he coughed. Terrible hacking cough it was. That's why we called him Hacky. Hacky seemed an old man to us kids, Mr. Pope continued, though I dare say he wasn't much above 40. He'd been gassed in the First World War, you see, boy, and that had ruined him. His hair turned white, and he never hardly worked again through having such a cough. And he lost his eye. How awful, said Nigel. Did he just have a hole? He did, said Mr. Pope. But he had a glass eye that fitted in it. Except that it didn't move, you'd never have known it wasn't real. What colour was it? Inquired Nigel. Blue, said Mr. Pope. The same as the other one, just like mine. And yours, boy. In those days, Mr. Pope went on, people didn't go in so much for babysitters, but my mum and dad were the careful sort, and if they went to the pictures, they'd ask Hacky Basham to keep an eye on me. But just how he kept an eye on me, they never knew. How did he? Asked Nigel. Well, when I was tucked up in bed, said Mr. Pope, like you are now, boy, Hacky had come upstairs, coughing fit to bust, and he'd come into the room and stand there, wheezing, and he'd say, I'm going to keep an eye on you, boy. And he'd take out his glass eye and put it on the mantelpiece, right on the edge, so it was looking at me. If you're naughty, he'd say, my eye'll tell me, it always does, and he'd go off downstairs laughing and coughing, and the eye would look at me. Even in the dark I could see it, because there was a street lamp outside. How awful, said Nigel. Oh, but that was just the beginning, went on Mr. Pope. One night my cousin Jack had come to stay. He was sleeping in my room on a camp bed, and I was glad of his company because my mum and dad were going out that night. Did Hacky Basham come? Asked Nigel. He did, said Mr. Pope grimly. And he put his eye on the mantelpiece and went downstairs, laughing and coughing like always. Now, Jack was older than me, and he said, here, he said, we'll give the old boy a dose of his own medicine. Frighten him for a change. We'll hide it. And he made me put the bedclothes over my head so I wouldn't see where he put it. What happened? Breathed Nigel. I lay there with a sheet over my head, said Mr. Pope, and I listened to Jack moving about, looking for a good hiding place. I heard him open drawers and shut them again. Then he pulled the door of the wardrobe open. Then he shut that, and then he opened the window and shut it again. You can come out now, he said to me, and he was grinning all over his face. You haven't thrown it out in the street, have you? I asked him. And he just laughed, and he wouldn't tell me. Anyway, Mr. Pope went on, Jack went to sleep. I kept thinking about the eye, hidden somewhere and still looking at me from wherever it was, and I couldn't go to sleep. Then Hacky came upstairs. When he stopped coughing, he looked on the mantelpiece, and then he came over to my bed. Where is it? He whispered. I told him I didn't know. He bent over my bed with his mouth right close to my ear. Whoever took it, he said, will come to a bad end very soon. But you, my boy, I'll keep an eye on you forever. Next morning, Jack looked outside for the eye. There was a window box on our sill, and Jack had put the eye in there, wedged in the earth among the petunias. But it had gone. Oh, how odd, said Nigel. Mr. Pope ignored him. When my cousin Jack was going home that morning, he went on, he slipped on the wet road and fell under a tram. Killed him stone dead. No, gasped Nigel. And that night, when I went to bed, the eye was on my mantelpiece. He held up his hand as if to ward off any questions. Hacky Basham hadn't been to the house. He never came again. An infection set in that very day in the eye socket, went through to his brain and killed him. Mr. Pope stared through Nigel again with his pale blue eyes. I was haunted, boy. I've been haunted from that day to this. What do you mean? Asked Nigel nervously. Hackey Basham's glass eye never left me from that day onwards, said Mr. Pope. It was always there looking at me. I never knew where it would be. If I took out my sandwiches when I went fishing, there it was in the package looking like a hard-boiled egg until it rolled over and stared up at me. If I got in a bus and felt in my pocket for the fare, the eye would be there among the pennies waiting for me to put my hand on it. But how did it get there? Asked Nigel. I wish I knew, said Mr. Pope. It was no good hiding it. I put it in my drawer along with my socks once when I'd asked a girl to come to the pictures with me. I bought her a packet of peanuts in the interval. When she opened them, there was the eye staring up at her. She screamed the place down. She dropped the eye on the floor before she ran out of the cinema. And that night, it was back on my mantelpiece. I don't think it's a very nice story, said Nigel. But it's a very special story, Nigel, said Mr. Pope, gazing at him with the fish-cold blue eyes. Oh, yes, the eye ruined my life. I never married, frightened off every girl I met, and it lost me job after job by turning up at the wrong moment. Well, I'd have told my mother, said Nigel stoutly. She'd know what to do. Oh, I tried that, said Mr. Pope. I held it out to her on the palm of my hand and said, Mum, this is Mr. Basham's glass eye. And she looked straight at it and said, oh, don't be silly, dear, there's nothing there. And Dad couldn't see it either. They went to a doctor about me after a bit, thought I was nuts. I had to pretend I couldn't see it any more. They'd have put me in the madhouse. Nigel gulped. What happened? He asked. In the end, I mean. Oh, I don't know yet, said Mr. Pope. That's up to you. He felt in his pocket and brought something out in his closed fist. Nigel stared at the scarred knuckles and knew what they hid. Oh, don't, he said. Mr. Pope turned his hand over and opened the fingers. There on the palm lay the glass eye, the pale blue iris pointing directly at Nigel, staring at him with a hard, wide-open, black-centered stare. Tiny veins of red threaded the china-white ball, exactly like those in Mr. Pope's own eyes. Nigel couldn't look away. You can see it, can't you, boy? Said Mr. Pope. Nigel nodded, speechless. Mr. Pope got up slowly and put the eye on the mantelpiece. There, he said with a dry chuckle. Now it'll keep an eye on you. And then he sighed, a small, happy sigh. Peace at last, he said, after a haunted lifetime. I'm grateful to you, boy. Grateful. And suddenly a spasm of violent coughing shook him. Nigel had never heard Mr. Pope cough like that before. He'd never heard him cough at all. It sounded as if the man's lungs were being torn into shreds, so destructive was the fit. Mr. Pope lurched out of the room, and Nigel lay back in relief. He heard Mr. Pope stagger down the stairs, still coughing. Then the coughing gave way to a burst of wild, harsh laughter. After that, there was a tumbling crash, as though the man had fallen down the last few steps of the stairs. Then there was silence. Nigel cowered in his bed, and the glass eye on the mantelpiece stared down at him with an implacable blue gaze. It seemed a lifetime before Nigel heard the car come into the garage. A key scratched in the front door. Nigel's mother gave a shriek of horror as she came into the hall. Nigel heard his father say, "Oh, my God, poor old boy." And then his mother came running up the stairs. "Mummy!" screamed Nigel. "Mummy!" His mother rushed in and hugged him in trembling arms. "The eye, Mummy," begged Nigel. "Take the eye away." "Nigel, dear," said his mother, "it's all right. Mr. Pope is... well, he's had a little accident. But everything's all right now. No need to worry. Mummy's here." It was quite obvious that Mr. Pope was dead. But that wasn't what mattered. Nigel took a deep breath. "Mummy," he said carefully, Listen. Please, take that eye away. Hacky Basham's glass eye. It's on the mantelpiece. Look. Nigel's mother turned her head to follow the direction of his pointing hand. Nigel glanced again at the round white eye that stared at him with its blue triumphant gaze from the mantelpiece and said irritably, "Why don't you take it away?" "Nigel," said his mother gently. "Darling, there's nothing there."
The Babysitter was read by Hayden Jones and produced by Dan Garrett.
There was gaslight only in the living room downstairs. He went into the bathroom, locked the door, and ran the bath, conscious that in spite of his good resolutions, he still felt uneasy. As he undressed, the tension increased. He started violently when he heard a noise behind him, coming apparently from the empty grate. But although he examined it carefully, there was nothing there to account for the noise. It was just as he turned to go back to the bath that he slipped and fell heavily to the floor. Half stunned, he lay there, and before he could summon up enough energy to get to his feet, his candle flickered and went out. In the impenetrable blackness which surrounded him, his fears naturally increased, and he was just trying to remember in which direction the door was, when he was paralyzed by a new noise. Someone was in the bath he had just run. He could hear the splash of water and the quite unmistakable sounds of someone soaping his body. He could even hear the rather heavy breathing. Just when he had summoned up enough courage to call out, he heard the creak of the cupboard door opening. Rigid with renewed fear, he listened to the soft rustle of silken underskirts, to the sound of light approaching footsteps, and then a chill, weightless shoe was placed on his chest. Silken garments swept over him as though he did not exist, and continued to the edge of the bath, where the occupants still washed, splashed, and breathed heavily. Suddenly the noises changed. There was a loud splash, followed by a terrible choking gasp, and the ineffectual drumming of heels on the bottom of the bath. Terror-stricken, Mr. Graham listened as the sounds in the bath grew fainter and fainter, and the noise of breathing stopped altogether. For a time, all he could hear was the monotonous drip, drip of water from one of the taps. And then there was the rustle of long skirts again, as the wearer turned and made for the fireplace and the cupboard beside it. Suddenly, a pallid light glowed in the blackness of the room by the cupboard, a light which revealed a woman's face. That she was beautiful, Mr. Graham had no doubt. But he glimpsed more than beauty in that face. He saw there an evil and a hatred which made him turn away in sick disgust. When he looked again, the face had gone, and once more the room was in total darkness. Now he had endured as much as his nerves would stand. Groping his way to the door, he unlocked it, stumbled out and along the passage. He told his wife all that had happened, only to be met with blank incredulity. "Who ever heard of a ghost taking a bath? You did say it was a ghost, didn't you?" "What else could it have been? I'll swear I was alone in that bathroom when I locked the door." "Oh, really, dear? We all use that room every day, and no one else has ever seen anything strange in it. You imagined it, dear, because your candle went out when you slipped and fell."
"It went out after I had fallen, not when I was falling. And I told you before we bought this place that I didn't like that room."
"You did, and now you're letting your imagination run away with you to provide you with a reason for your dislike. All I ask of you is not to let the children know of these foolish fantasies."
"I tell you they're not fantasies. There were two other beings in that room with me, and one, the woman, murdered the other."
"Very well," his wife said with a patient sigh. "Let's go and investigate. They lit 2 candles and returned to the bathroom. There was no one there, no one in the cupboard. The bath itself was half full of clear, lukewarm water. No one could possibly have washed in it without leaving some trace. Neither of the new taps dripped.
"All right," Mr. Graham said in a defeated tone. "I panicked in the darkness and imagined it all."
The Grahams agreed to forget about the matter. Certainly nothing was ever hinted at in front of the children. And then one morning, the eldest son announced that he was going up to have a bath. His parents heard him leap up the stairs, turn on the taps, and whistle cheerfully. They heard him turn off the taps, and then the whistling stopped abruptly. A shriek after shriek of terror rang out. They both ran from the sitting room to the hall in time to see their son dash wildly from the bathroom into his bedroom and slam the door shut. "Whatever is the matter?" Mrs. Graham demanded, hurrying up and looking in the bathroom. She tried the water, but the child couldn't possibly have scalded himself as she first feared. "I can't find anything the matter," she said, looking over the banister at her husband. "Don't you think you ought to come up and look for yourself?"
"Nothing now will get me into that bathroom," her husband answered. "Go and comfort the boy and see what he has to say, and then you come down and tell me."
Mrs. Graham remained with her wildly sobbing child for some time, calming him down, assuring him that he was perfectly safe.
"It was horrible, Mama,"
the boy shuddered.
"Horrible. I just run my bath and was going to step in, and then I saw... Oh, I know you won't believe this, but it's true, Mama. I promise you it's true. There was someone else lying in the bath, an old man with grey hair. His face, oh, it was all purple and swollen, and his eyes were wide and staring. Oh, Mama, those dreadful, dreadful eyes."
And the boy began to cry again. Once more his mother calmed him down and called to her husband to come upstairs, determined that the 3 of them would see for themselves, but she knew already that the bathroom was absolutely empty. Reluctantly her husband mounted the stairs. Together mother, father, and son left the bedroom and crossed the landing and stopped. They were not alone on that first floor. A beautiful young woman, dressed in expensive clothes and wearing costly jewelry, walked past them as though she owned the house and they did not exist, and disappeared into the cupboard in the bathroom. Mrs. Graham stood stock still for several seconds and then turned to her husband. "I'm sorry," she said.
"This place is evil, but the evil is none of our making. We shall move into an hotel tomorrow and look for a new home. Oh, tell the agent to sell this place as quickly as possible."
But Mrs. Graham was curious as well as practical. She wanted to know just why their house was haunted, and she had discreet inquiries made in the neighborhood. Naturally, people were reluctant to talk. It was a well-to-do neighborhood of respectable middle-class citizens. Gossip could only cause distress and bring crowds of sightseers to stare and disturb everyone. It was all over and done with, and people with influence had managed to keep the incident away from the headlines, even though it might have involved murder. Murder? Although Mrs. Graham was prepared for this, she was still shocked. Yes, that was what some people said. It appeared some time previously the house had been owned by a very rich old man. One day he brought home a bride. Some said she was Spanish, but everyone agreed that she was extremely beautiful. Her husband showered her with gifts of expensive clothes and even more expensive jewelry. Anything she wanted was hers. But he was old, and she was young. It wasn't long before she discovered that money doesn't buy happiness. The splendid house became a prison, her husband an old and ugly jailer. The servants heard them quarreling more and more frequently. They noticed how the girl's once beautiful face was becoming distorted with anger and hatred. One day the old man was found dead in his bath. His young widow wept and was inconsolable. She had loved her husband dearly and had frequently warned him against his habit of indulging in long, hot baths. It was obvious to her what had happened. He had disregarded her advice, fainted, falling back into the water, had been drowned. It was all a terrible accident. Of course, there was an inquest, very discreet. Sympathy was with the beautiful young widow dressed so becomingly in black. And the doctor affirmed that there was no evidence of any violence. The verdict was accidental death. The Grahams knew it was no accident. Mr. Graham had heard exactly how it had happened. His wife and son had seen the young bride and the old husband. But none of them could prove anything. They just knew.
And if you was to walk through the bedrooms now, you'd see the ragged, mouldy bedclothes a-heaving and a-heaving like seas. And a-heaving with what, he says? Why, with the rats under 'em. But was it with the rats? I ask, because in another case it was not. I cannot put a date to the story, but I was young when I heard it, and the teller was old. It is an ill-proportioned tale, but that is my fault, not his. It happened in Suffolk, near the coast, in a place where the road makes a sudden dip and then a sudden rise. As you go northward, at the top of that rise, stands a house on the left of the road. It is a tall, red brick house, narrow for its height. Perhaps it was built about 1770. The top of the front has a low triangular pediment with a round window in the centre. Behind it are the stables and offices, and such garden as it has is behind them. Scraggy Scotch firs are near it. An expanse of gorse-covered land stretches away from it. It commands a view of the distant sea from the upper windows of the front. A sign on a post stands before the door, or did so stand, for though it was an inn of repute once, I believe it is no longer. To this inn came my acquaintance, Mr. Thompson, when he was a young man, on a fine spring day, coming from the University of Cambridge, and desirous of solitude in tolerable quarters and time for reading. These he found, for the landlord and his wife had been in service and could make a visitor comfortable, and there was no one else staying in the inn. He had a large room on the first floor, commanding the road and the view, and if it faced east, why, that could not be helped. The house was well built and warm. He spent very tranquil and uneventful days, work all the morning, an afternoon perambulation of the country round, a little conversation with country company or the people of the inn in the evening over the then fashionable drink of brandy and water, a little more reading and writing, and bed. And he would have been content that this should continue for the full month he had at disposal, so well was his work progressing, and so fine was the April of that year, which I have reason to believe was that which Orlando Whistlecraft chronicles in his weather record of as the charming year. One of his walks took him along the northern road, which stands high and traverses a wide common, called a heath. On the bright afternoon when he first chose this direction, his eye caught a white object some hundreds of yards to the left of the road, and he felt it necessary to make sure what this might be. It was not long before he was standing by it, and found himself looking at a square block of white stone, fashioned somewhat like the base of a pillar, with a square hole in the upper surface. Just such another you may see at this day on Thetford Heath. After taking stock of it, he contemplated for a few minutes the view, which offered a church tower or two, some red roofs of cottages and windows winking in the sun, and the expanse of sea, also with an occasional wink and gleam upon it, and so pursued his way. In the desultory evening talk in the bar, he asked why the white stone was there on the common. "A old-fashioned thing, that is," said the landlord, Mr. Betts. "We was none of us alive when that was put there." "That's right," said another. "It stands pretty high," said Mr. Thompson. "I dare say a sea mark was on it some time back." "Ah, Yes, Mr. Betts agreed. I have heard they could see it from the boats. But whatever there was, it's fell to bits this long time. Good job, too, said a third. 'Tweren't a lucky mark, by what the old men used to say. Not lucky for the fishing, I mean to say. Why ever not? Said Thompson. Well, I never see it myself, was the answer. But they had some funny ideas. What I mean, peculiar, them old chaps. And I shouldn't wonder but what they made away with it themselves. It was impossible to get anything clearer than this. The company, never very voluble, fell silent, and when next someone spoke it was of village affairs and crops. Mr. Betts was the speaker. Not every day did Thompson consult his health by taking a country walk. One very fine afternoon found him busily writing at 3 o'clock. Then he stretched himself and rose, and walked out of his room into the passage. Facing him was another room, then the stairhead, then 2 more rooms, one looking out to the back, the other to the south. At the south end of the passage was a window, to which he went, considering with himself that it was rather a shame to waste such a fine afternoon. However, work was paramount just at the moment. He thought he would just take 5 minutes off and go back to it, and those 5 minutes he would employ, the Bettses could not possibly object, to looking at the other rooms in the passage, which he had never seen. Nobody at all, it seemed, was indoors. Probably, as it was market day, they were all gone to the town, except perhaps a maid in the bar. Very still the house was, and the sun shone really hot. Early flies buzzed in the window panes. So he explored. The room facing his own was undistinguished except for an old print of Bury St. Edmunds. The 2 next him on his side of the passage were gay and clean, with 1 window apiece, whereas his had 2. Remained the southwest room, opposite to the last which he had entered. This was locked, but Thompson was in a mood of quite indefensible curiosity, and feeling confident that there could be no damaging secrets in a place so easily got at, he proceeded to fetch the key of his own room, and when that did not answer, to collect the keys of the other 3. One of them fitted, and he opened the door. The room had 2 windows looking south and west, so it was as bright and the sun as hot upon it as could be. Here there was no carpet, but bare boards, no pictures, no washing stand, only a bed in the farther corner, an iron bed, with mattress and bolster, covered with a bluish check counterpane. As featureless a room as you can well imagine. And yet there was something that made Thompson close the door very quickly, and yet quietly behind him, and lean against the window-sill in the passage, actually quivering all over. It was this, that under the counterpane someone lay, and not only lay, but stirred. That it was some one, and not something, was certain, because the shape of a head was unmistakable on the bolster. And yet it was all covered, and no one lies with covered head but a dead person. And this was not dead, not truly dead, for it heaved and shivered. If he had seen these things in dusk or by the light of a flickering candle, Thompson could have comforted himself and talked of fancy. On this bright day that was impossible. What was to be done? First, lock the door at all costs. Very gingerly he approached it, and bending down listened, holding his breath. Perhaps there might be a sound of heavy breathing, and a prosaic explanation. There was absolute silence. But as, with a rather tremulous hand, he put the key into its hole and turned it, it rattled, and on the instant a stumbling padding tread was heard coming towards the door. Thompson fled like a rabbit to his room and locked himself in. Futile enough, he knew it was. Would doors and locks be any obstacle to what he suspected? But it was all he could think of at the moment. And in fact, nothing happened. Only there was a time of acute suspense, followed by a misery of doubt as to what to do. The impulse, of course, was to slip away as soon as possible from a house which contained such an inmate. but only the day before he had said he should be staying for at least a week more. And how, if he changed plans, could he avoid the suspicion of having pried into places where he certainly had no business? Moreover, either the Bettses knew all about the inmate, and yet did not leave the house, or knew nothing, which equally meant that there was nothing to be afraid of, or knew just enough to make them shut up the room, but not enough to weigh on their spirits. In any of these cases it seemed that not much was to be feared, and certainly so far he had had no sort of ugly experience. On the whole, the line of least resistance was to stay. Well, he stayed out his week. Nothing took him past that door, and, often as he would pause in a quiet hour of the day or night in the passage and listen, no sound whatever issued from that direction. You might have thought that Thompson would have made some attempt at ferreting out stories connected with the inn, hardly perhaps from Betts, but from the parson of the parish, or old people in the village. But no. The reticence which commonly falls on people who have had strange experiences and believe in them was upon him. Nevertheless, as the end of his stay drew near, his yearning after some kind of explanation grew more and more acute. On his solitary walks he persisted in planning out some way, the least obtrusive, of getting another daylight glimpse into that room, and eventually arrived at this scheme. He would leave by an afternoon train, about 4 o'clock. When his fly was waiting, and his luggage on it, he would make one last expedition upstairs to look round his own room and see if anything was left unpacked, and then, with that key, which he had contrived to oil, as if that made any difference, the door should once more be opened, for a moment, and shut. So it worked out. The bill was paid, the consequent small talk gone through, while the fly was loaded. Pleasant part of the country, been very comfortable, thanks to you and Mrs. Betts. Hope to come back some time, on one side. On the other, very glad you found satisfaction, sir. Done our best. Always glad to have your good word. Very much favoured we've been with the weather, to be sure. Then, I'll just take a look upstairs in case I've left a book or something out. No, don't trouble. I'll be back in a minute. And as noiselessly as possible he stole to the door and opened it. The shattering of the illusion. He almost laughed aloud. Propped, or you might say sitting, on the edge of the bed was nothing in the round world but a scarecrow. A scarecrow out of the garden, of course, dumped into the deserted room. Yes, but here amusement ceased. Have scarecrows bare, bony feet? Do their heads loll onto their shoulders? Have they iron collars and links of chain about their necks? Can they get up and move, if never so stiffly, across a floor, with wagging head and arms close at their sides? And shiver? The slam of the door, the dash to the stairhead, the leap downstairs were followed by a faint. Awaking, Thompson saw Betts standing over him with the brandy bottle and a very reproachful face. "You shouldn't ha' done so, sir. Really you shouldn't. It ain't a kind way to act by persons as done the best they could for you." Thompson heard words of this kind, but what he said in reply he did not know. Mr. Betts, and perhaps even more Mrs. Betts, found it hard to accept his apologies and his assurances that he would say no word that could damage the good name of the house. However, they were accepted. Since the train could not now be caught, it was arranged that Thompson should be driven to the town to sleep there. Before he went, the Bettses told him what little they knew. They says he was landlord here a long time back, and was in with the highwaymen that had their beat about the heath. That's how he came by his end. Hung in chains, they say, up where you see that stone where the gallows stood in. Yes, the fishermen made away with that, I believe, because they see it out at sea, and it kept the fish off, according to their idea. Yes, we had the account from the people that had the house before we come. You keep that room shut up, they says, but don't move the bed out, and you'll find there won't be no trouble. and no more there has been. Not once he haven't come out into the house, though what he may do now there ain't no sayin'. Anyway, you're the first I know on that's seen him since we've been here. I never set eyes on him myself, nor don't want. And ever since we've made the servants' rooms in the stablin', we ain't had no difficulty that way. Only I do hope, sir, as you'll keep a close tongue, considerin' how an house do get talked about. With more to this effect. The promise of silence was kept for many years. The occasion of my hearing the story at last was this, that when Mr. Thompson came to stay with my father, it fell to me to show him to his room. And instead of letting me open the door for him, he stepped forward and threw it open himself, and then for some moments stood in the doorway holding up his candle and looking narrowly into the interior. Then he seemed to recollect himself and said, "I beg your pardon. Very absurd, but I can't help doing that, for a particular reason." What that reason was, I heard some days afterwards, and you have heard it now. Sweet dreams.
Suspense. And the producer of radio's outstanding theater of thrills, the master of mystery and adventure, William N. Robeson.
In a niche all his own, apart from other great tellers of tales of terror, stands the moody, dark, and devious genius, Edgar Allan Poe. Obscure and ambiguous, the rolling periods of his prose are not for the casual reader, no more than for the casual listener. But for sheer suspense compounded of horror piled upon horror, literature offers nothing more awful than The Pit and the Pendulum. The terror of the Black Pit would have sufficed a lesser imagination, but to this, the macabre intellect of Poe added the inescapable doom of the razor-sharp pendulum, and then piled on the rats and the moving walls of red-hot iron until the edge of the unbearable is reached. Can you take it? Can you listen through the next half hour? Try. Try to listen to Mr. Vincent Price, starring in The Pit and the Pendulum, which begins in exactly 1 minute.
This is Bob Wright with the answer to the greatest challenge in cigarette history. The challenge was,
can a cigarette be made that will give decidedly better filtration and also give easy draw with full, natural tobacco flavor?
The answer is Kent. Kent with the revolutionary new micronite filter that gives Kent decidedly better filtration, definitely less stars and nicotine than any other leading filter brand.
Kent, filters, best.
The answer is Kent, with the full, rich flavor of the world's premium quality natural tobaccos and an easy draw. Yes, of all leading filter brands, Kent filters best.
Kent filters best.
Tomorrow, pick up a pack of Kents with a revolutionary new micronite filter and enjoy the most important advance in the progress of filter smoking.
Kent filters best.
And now, Mr. Vincent Price stars in Edgar Allan Poe's immortal story of punishment by terror, The Pit and the Pendulum. A tale well calculated to keep you in suspense.
I was sick unto death with that long agony. And when at length they unbound me and I was permitted to sit, I felt that my senses were leaving me. The sound of the inquisitorial voices seemed merged in one dreamy, indeterminate hum, from which emerged the syllables of my name.
Captain Jean d'Albret.
Good fathers, gentlemen.
We hear you, my son.
Even now I have no knowledge of where I am or to whom I may be speaking.
You're speaking to me, my son. I am Fra Pedro d'Espia, prior of the Dominicans of Segovia, and Grand Inquisitor for all Spain.
This, then, is the court of the Inquisition?
It is.
But I am a French officer.
That is true. A soldier and creature of the arch-fiend, the Antichrist Napoleon Bonaparte, who even now is at the gates of Madrid, while his General Lassalle menaces our city of Toledo itself.
Nonetheless, I am a prisoner of war. By what right do you try me in this court?
Let the clerk read the charges against the prisoner.
Item, that on the 4th day of September, in the year of our Lord, 1808, the said Captain Jean d'Albret did wed and espouse that most noble lady, the Doña Beatriz Valdez, niece and ward of the illustrious...
One moment.
Excellency?
This marriage was a deplorable thing, if you like, but lawful marriage, however regrettable in a case like this, is no sin or crime.
There are other matters in the indictment.
Then continue, but give us nothing that is not material.
Item, that on the 12th of October, 1808, the said Jean d'Albret, being in command of a battery of light artillery, did direct the fire of his guns against the holy church of Santa Marta the Innocent, and thereby, of his wicked malice, destroyed that church utterly.
Captain d'Albret, is this charge true?
Yes.
You admit it.
Good father, the church blew up, did it not?
Would you boast of your sin, young man?
It blew up because it was stored with kegs of gunpowder for your army. I had every right to fire on it.
And that is all the defense you have to make?
I tell you, I had every right to fire on it by military law.
Is military law above God's law?
I don't know. I did my duty. Long live the Emperor!
Captain d'Albret, mark what I say. No man, however great his heresy, is condemned to be burnt in the fire if he first recant and acknowledge the error of his ways. Do you so?
I cannot. I was under orders. I obeyed them.
Then, Jean d'Albret, there can be no mercy, no pity, since there is no atonement. The sentence of this court, therefore, is...
I had swooned in terror, yet I will not say that all of consciousness was lost. In the deepest slumber, no. In delirium, no. In a swoon, no. In death, no. Even in the grave, all is not lost, else there is no immortality for man.
In a moment, we continue with the second act of Suspense. But first, some big news.
From Bold to Pontiac, the Bold to Pontiac, the Bold to Pontiac is here.
With a Pontiac front seat that lets you in the back seat.
Pontiac automatically moves up and back just like that. Pontiac automatically. A portable radio that pulls right out and plays all alone. When you plug it back in, it's a car radio, high fidelity too.
What a nice tone.
Set your speed on the new speedometer, Pontiac automatically.
If you go too fast, a buzzer goes buzz,
Pontiac automatically. More good reasons you love the bold new Pontiac. Pontiac automatically.
The bold new Pontiac is here.
And now, Mr. Vincent Price in The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe. A tale well calculated to keep you in suspense.
No, even in the grave all is not lost. There were shadows of memory which told me indistinctly of tall figures that lifted me and bore me in silence down, down, still down, until a hideous dizziness oppressed me at that descent into the earth. There was a vague horror at my heart because of that heart's unnatural stillness. Then, as consciousness swam back to my wits again, darkness, a damp stone floor in darkness. Oh, Beatrice. Oh, my wife.
Did you call me, Jean?
Beatrice. You? Here? In the dungeons of the Inquisition?
No, my poor Jean. I am only here in your imagination.
Am I mad, then?
No, but your brain is fevered. You only think you hear me.
I hear you clearly. You won't leave me.
As long as I am in your heart, I shall be here. Have they chained you to the wall?
No, they've taken away my uniform. They've given me sandals and a robe of rough cloth, but I'm unchained. Beatrice, suppose they have buried me alive.
Have courage, Jean. You must have courage.
Then tell me where you are now, Beatrice, in the flesh, I mean.
In the old house by the olive grove, scorned of my people.
Yes, I know.
Each morning I climb to the hilltop and watch for them.
Yes.
Sometimes I think I hear gun wheels rumble in the hills and long moving columns with the red dust rising above them.
Go on.
First come the heavy cavalry in plume-crested helmets, on their flanks wheeling like hawks, light hussars in blue and scarlet, and behind them in a glitter of bayonets as vast as light points on the sea, rank upon rank, the long gray coats and tall bearskin caps.
The old guard and the grand army.
It's only a vision, my dear one. They do not come.
Will they ever come, Beatrice?
I cannot tell.
Then I must face what has been prepared for me.
Can you stand up, Jean?
I think so.
Then walk.
Yes.
Walk as far as you can. Measure the limits of the cell if this is not a tomb.
I'll try, Beatrice. I'll try. This robe impedes me and the floor is treacherous with slime, but I'll try.
Look out! Jean!
Oh, I'm all right. I fell on my face. The robe tripped me.
What, Jean?
But my hand is in front of me, lower than my face, but I feel nothing.
Nothing, Jean.
It's a pit, a deep circular pit, and I fell on the very edge of it.
They would have had you walk into it.
Yes.
But you didn't. You're saved, Jean.
Saved, Beatrice. Saved. My torture has been merely postponed. At last, a deep sleep fell upon me, a sleep like that of death. How long it lasted, I know not. But when I opened my eyes once again, I could see. Yes, see. My prison was large and lofty, its walls formed of massive iron plates. A wild, sulphurous luster, I could not trace its origin, lit up the dungeon and the circular pit. I could see, but I could not move. I lay on my back on a low framework of wood, securely bound by a long fastening resembling a surgical bandage. The bandage passed round and round my body, leaving at liberty only my head and my left arm. With much exertion, I could supply myself with food from an earthen dish on the floor beside me. It was meat, highly seasoned, and there was no water. Beatrice, where are you?
I am here, Jean.
Your voice sounds stronger, and I can see you.
You are weaker, my dear, and more fevered.
Look, Beatrice.
Where?
At the ceiling of this room, 30, 40 feet up. What do you see?
I see, painted on the ceiling, a figure of Father Time.
Yes, but this Father Time carries no scythe. It carries instead what looks like a gigantic pendulum from an ancient clock. And the pendulum is moving.
The painting cannot move.
But I swear the pendulum did. It swung a little back and forth, just like a real pendulum. Beatrice, take care.
Take care of what?
Take care of the rats. The rats from the pit. They're swarming out in dozens. You can see their eyes glitter. What do they want? What do they want?
They have caught the scent of the meat in the dish beside you.
They'll not get it. Go! Go away, you vermin!
Au revoir, Jean. Au revoir.
Beatrice, where are you going? I can hardly hear you.
You are sending me away, Jean.
I'm sending you away.
My poor loved one. You can't bear to see the rats running about my feet, can you? Even when you know I'm not here.
Beat.
It is true, Jean. You are sending me away.
Yes, it's true. In a cell swarming with vermin, there are others I would rather see here. I would rather see.
If you call me Captain d'Albret, then in spirit I am here.
Go. I command you, Fra Antonio. Go!
Not until I have first told you what is in store for you.
Which is?
Listen. Do you hear anything?
Yes, I hear something.
Turn your eyes upward. Look at the ceiling.
The pendulum.
Aye, the pendulum.
It is descended.
Only a foot or so as yet. As you notice, it is not really a pendulum.
No?
No. Its underside is a crescent formed of razor-sharp steel.
You mean?
The ponderous weight, Captain d'Albret. Its movement is slow now, but soon it will take on momentum. It will swing wider and wider, and with each broad movement, it will creep a trifle lower.
The steel is directly over me.
Yes, above the region of your heart.
How long before?
You need have no immediate fear. It will not be too soon.
But how soon?
Who can tell?
Minutes, hours, days. Who can say how long it was? It might have been many days before that hideous blade swept so closely as to fan me with its acrid breath. Down. Still unceasingly, still inevitably down. The sharp steel flashed past within 3 inches of my chest. And then, only then, Beatrice.
I hear you calling, Jean. I am here.
Oh, Beatrice.
Is there no hope, my dear?
How can there be? 10, 12 more vibrations and it will fray the threads of my robe, only lightly as a razor in a delicate hand. There will be many sweeps down before it bites deep. I can't escape it, and yet, if only I could use my wits.
You kept me away from you, Jean. You locked me out of your thoughts. If I am here only in your thoughts, why should I fear the rats?
The rats? The rats? Do they still swarm here?
Across the floor and over the meat platter. Yes. They have taken nearly all your food.
Yes, they are ravenous. They have sharp teeth. The meat is oily and spiced. If I take what remains of it, scatter, you vermin! Rub that meat on the bandages that hold me here.
Try it, Jean, try.
It may be too late. If I move my body of a fraction of an inch up,
Try it, I tell you, try.
Can I stand those rats crawling across me? Can the flesh bear it?
Oh, one of them has leaped on the wooden framework. Another follows. They are gnawing at the bandage.
7, 8 more sweeps of the pendulum.
Does the bandage give way? Lie still, Jean, lie still.
10, a dozen rats now. Is death, I wonder, worse than this disgust?
A dozen sharp knives could do no better. The bandage has loosened to ribbons. If you move sideways, carefully, and drop to the floor.
Beatrice, I can't move. My arms and legs are numb. There is no
The
power
steel
to...
has frayed your robe. A minute more will be too late. Try.
Then with all the strength that is in me and the hatred I bear my enemies...
You're free.
Yes, a second time I'm free.
See, Jean. The pendulum stops. They are drawing it back up through the roof.
Each move I make is watched. You never doubted that?
No. Yet with all they could do to you, they have failed twice.
They will not fail a third time, my dear. Listen.
What do you hear?
A groaning. A grinding as of metal.
It is only the cogwheels of the pendulum.
I think not, Beatrice.
Why not?
It seems to come from behind these iron-plated walls. It seems to shake the dungeon as a mill wheel might shake it.
Stand up, my poor Jean. Get up off your knees.
I can't endure any more. Don't you sense even now the odor of the heated iron?
Heated iron?
Yes, the walls are beginning to glow red. Oh, Beatrice, I have been much humbled, but I won't have you see me in tears.
I order you to go.
No, in the name of
Yes,
heaven.
in the name of heaven, go.
In just a moment, we continue with the third act of Suspense.
More families, far more families, use X-Lax than any other laxative. X-Lax is the preferred laxative for one important reason. X-Lax helps you toward your normal regularity, gently, overnight. Today, many doctors recommend trusted X-Lax for youngsters as well as grown-ups.
That's because X-Lax gives you the relief you want, the gentle way that nature wants, without upset. When you take chocolated X-Lax at night, it does not disturb your sleep. And X-Lax is so effective that the next morning you'll be well on your way toward your normal regularity. Seldom, if ever, will you need X-Lax the next day.
Little wonder that of all the laxatives made today, tablet, powder, or liquid, X-Lax is the most popular. Next time, any time that you or any member of your family needs a laxative, make that laxative pleasant-tasting chocolated X-Lax. Introductory size, only 15 cents.
And now, Act 3 of The Pit and the Pendulum, starring Mr. Vincent Price. A tale well calculated to keep you in suspense.
Suffocating heat pervaded the prison. I could draw no breath of air into my lungs. Against the lume of that fiery destruction, the thought of the pit and its coolness came like balm.
Does the pit please you, Captain Dalbray?
You again.
Do you find its contents pleasing?
Not the pit.
And how shall you avoid it? Look!
This dungeon has changed its shape.
That is true. The walls are closing in. It was formerly a square, and now
it is flattening slowly towards the center to force me into the pit.
Of course.
It will force you along with me.
Again, apparently, you must be told, Captain Dalbray, that you are speaking only to your own sick fancy. I am not here at all. Farewell.
Now, flatter and flatter grew the red-hot walls. I shrank back, but the closing walls pressed me relentlessly onward toward the loathsome pit. At length, for my seared and writhing body, there was no longer an inch of foothold. I screamed once. I tottered on the edge of the pit. I averted my eyes. Then there was a discordant hum of human voices, and then a loud blast of many trumpets. The fiery walls rushed back. An outstretched arm caught my own as I fell fainting into the abyss. It was that of General LaSalle. The French army had entered Toledo. The Spanish Inquisition was in the hands of its enemy.
Suspense, in which Mr. Vincent Price starred in William N. Robeson's production of The Pit and the Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe, adapted for suspense by John Dixon Carr. In a moment, the names of tonight's supporting players and a word about next week's story of Suspense.
Here's good news for everyone who appreciates fine music. Heinz Soups offer you the LP record bargain of the year. The best of 57 in classical music by famous RCA Victor. It's a genuine Red Seal LP of $3.98 quality. Yet it costs you just $1 in cash and 4 labels from any of Heinz condensed soups. That's right, just a $1 bill and 4 Heinz soup labels. Think of it, 43 minutes of the world's great music. Highlights from 8 RCA Victor albums, performed by famous orchestras directed by Morton Gould, Arthur Fiedler, Fritz Reiner, and others. Here's the only way you can get this wonderful 12-inch record. Send a $1 bill and 4 Heinz soup labels to Best of 57, Box 57, Rockaway, New Jersey. I repeat, Best of 57, Box 57, Rockaway, New Jersey. Send for yours right away.
Supporting Mr. Price in The Pit and the Pendulum were Ellen Morgan, Jay Novello, Ben Wright, and John Hoyt. Listen. Listen again next week when we return with another tale well calculated to keep you in suspense.
America listens most to the CBS Radio Network.
That's our show for tonight. I want to thank you all for listening. And remember, you can find me on Instagram at Radio Show Nerd, or you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/terror1970. I'm also on Blueskye at Terror Radio. I also have a YouTube channel. Please check it out. Like and subscribe. Share the videos. It would be highly appreciated. Again, this is your host, Keith, better known as the Radio Show Nerd, signing off.